Hi, Katty. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
How are you?
I'm well.
God.
I never. Do we do the sit back, relax,
Yeah,
or
well,
do we perch?
you want to try your relax?
Yeah, we
Let's
could
try your
try.
relax. How does that?
Yeah.
Does that work for you, or do you want to lean forward?
No, we'll do it. We'll do it.
How'd you do in the morning, Joe, this morning? That's kind of a little more.
Oh my goodness, I perch.
Yeah.
Percher in the morning, 6 o'clock. You have to perch. Otherwise,
Wow.
I'd be asleep. You know, if I leant back at.
Oh my
6
God!
in
But
the
you
morning.
said that it's nice of Morning Joe to have everybody back in real
well,
life.
like this, right? I mean, it's so nice to see each other.
I know, people are so excited to
So,
see
yeah,
each other.
it's great.
We had a nice event last night, and Katty spoke, and we also had Liz Clayman from Fox News, and of course John Miller from Lamar, and we all talked about how to lower the temperature. And God, you've learned a lot from your travels and your interviews all throughout America on the Trump documentary, which we'll talk about. But I think what's so important, which we also spoke about last night, is that you gain perspective from seeing people in different regions and different types of people. And that is really what we all should be doing, you know, kind of understanding people, not kind of going into our little echo chambers. But tell us about your documentary, which is called Trump, the Comeback, ?
You have to have the question mark in there.
Yeah.
With Trump, if nothing, he's unpredictable, right? So you have to have the question mark in there. I spent a month in June traveling across the United States. I traveled thousands of miles. We went to Arizona, Wyoming, Georgia, Pennsylvania, really to take the political temperature of the country. It was like a political road trip. And we were interviewing people from both sides of the aisle ahead of the midterm elections, kind of really trying to understand. It seems to me, I've covered now elections in the United States for almost 20 years. I don't know about you, Barry, but I've never seen so much focus on a midterm. I mean, mostly midterms are afterthoughts and everyone's like, yeah, whatever. This time, there is a ton of money going into these midterm elections. There's a lot of national attention, but there's also a lot of international attention.
Right.
It's the first election since January the 6th. And in this sense, the world is watching these midterm elections, wondering if America can pull off an election that is free and fair and most critically peaceful. And this election is a test of that.
That's a very good observation, and you've worked all around the world, as I mentioned. What is the world thinking about us today in a macro environment outside just the election? Do they look askance at us? I mean, when I've worked abroad on Charlotte Street and other places, and Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré, she lived in one of the most glorious areas of Paris, which is great. You know, people always looked up to America, and especially American business. And they'd say, wow, Barry, you're from New York. Wow. And are people still saying that these days, or what do they think of us?
So look, I think on the one hand, I've lived here long enough to see ups and downs in America's reputation abroad. I was here when there was a big spike in anti-American sentiment around the invasion of Iraq.
Right.
And then everyone kind of, fell back in love with America when Barack Obama got elected. And then we had President Trump elected, and everyone was like fascinated, by the sort of show of it all and by the kind of drama of the Trump administration. And this time around, I mean, I was on air on January the 6th for 8 hours straight, pretty much, and audiences around the world were gripped. They were watching in real time, in kind of disbelief, what was happening in the center of American power. And I think there's a certain amount of sadness. I mean, it's not disdain or anything like that. I think most people understand the world is better off when America is strong, engaged, and functioning well. That actually we benefit around the world from an engaged United States. And at the moment, from outside, we look at the US and see a country that is sort of wrestling with its own political divisions and not as Ukraine is an exception, and not as engaged as many countries would like it to be. And of course, there's always a concern, is America going to be surpassed by China? Is it going to be surpassed by India? The Chinese are spending a ton of money in Latin America and a ton of money in Africa. And there is some sort of, fear of ceding ground to the US.
And what about the US as the ideal democracy? I mean, Churchill had said what Americans, democracy works after they've tried everything else or whatever. Is there fear of the model of democracy taking hits? Is that a sensibility outside?
I think there is some concern about that because of what we learned over the last few years is democracy is partly laws that are either written down or not written down in a constitution, but it's partly norms and traditions. And if you blow up some of those norms and traditions, are you weakening the fabric of democracy? So when you don't have a peaceful transfer of power, when you don't have one president go to the inauguration of the other president, you start to pick away at the fabric of it. And one of the things I found so interesting when I was on this documentary, on this journey, was the number of people that said to me from both sides of the aisle, from Democrats and Republicans, that American democracy is in peril. But of course, they believe it for very different reasons. But there is a sort of consensus there that democracy is looking a bit fragile, and these midterm elections are really a test of American democracy.
Right. And so you've traveled around the country. What surprised you most? What did you hear?
That I could stay on horseback while cattle wrangling.
Great.
I was doing my favorite ever political interview was with a wonderful guy called Martin Kim. It could not have been nicer. He's a cattle wrangler in Wyoming. And we were on horseback and we were doing our interview about Liz Cheney and the January the 6th investigation. And suddenly Martin looks at me and says, "Oh my God, I left the gate open and the cattle have all run out." At which point, he and I are the only people on horseback, so I have to follow him. And we're charging through rivers, and I had the best.
Wow, what
It
fun.
was just great. So I was surprised that I could stay on. I think what surprised me...
I imagine you grew up on English style, not Western.
I grew up... Yeah, Western is easier. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I was surprised by the degree to which people are talking about violence.
Really?
And I heard it on both sides. I mean, I find it difficult to imagine that America's going to have a second civil war, and maybe that's a failure of imagination on my part. But I did hear a lot of people raise the prospect of violence or the fear of violence. I spoke to a wonderful election official, a worker down in Georgia, and after the last election, she had a bomb threat. And the FBI came to her office. She's a wonderful Georgia woman, had worked in elections for 20 years. The FBI came to her and said, you know, Deirdre, you've got to park your vehicle right outside your office window in case there's a blast that will stop some of the glass shattering against you.
Wow.
And she was not afraid. She said, I'm sad. I'm sad that people are losing faith in this system that she works every single day to try and uphold.
I'm hearing this theme of sadness. I mean, people are looking at this with frustration, with sadness, with ennui.
But you know, to counter that, Barry, the place everybody wants to come to, the universities everybody wants to attend, the ideas that are coming out of this country in innovation, in AI, in tech, I mean, where do they come from? They come from the US. This is still the place people look to for innovation and entrepreneurship and an ability to get things done.
So it's a great observation. And as you say that, is also what you're saying is that the innovation, the development, societal and business is coming more from business, entrepreneurs and corporate world than from government. I mean, if you look at even a lot of policies that are more pro-social, I mean, you've got, and as an example, you've got corporations that are funding abortions for people. I mean, a lot of the initiatives seem to be coming from companies rather than government. Is government failing relative to corporations?
I think America's been pretty ungovernable for a while. I mean, it's very difficult to get things done in Washington when parties are as split as they are at the moment, when you have divided government, and when really the incentive is to drift to the extremes of your political party. And into that breach have stepped mayors, governors, and CEOs. And it's really been fascinating to watch the way that over the last 3 or 4 years, you all know this because your CEOs have been in that position, that when a social issue comes up, whether it's race or guns or abortion or immigration, the young, not just consumers, but your employees are looking to your C-suite executives to have a message in a way that they never would have done. Now, I think that makes it hard to be a CEO at the moment because you've got to think, I don't want to alienate my employee base or I don't want to alienate my customer base. But take an issue like climate change. Where is the innovation happening in America? It's happening in towns and it's happening in corporations. I mean, that's where the energy is on some of the biggest issues of our time.
Very true. In fact, Francois, my chairman, his family and company have developed a water conservation initiative that, kudos to you for really leading the charge. Francois had an hour to present at the Canadian Ad Club 2 weeks ago. He didn't sell any of his 3 businesses. He basically sold what was going on with climate change and how we need to really conserve water. So It was really well done, Francois, and amazingly articulate as well. So on the good side,
Yep.
there's probably some hope out there. What did you see? And I saw you. I encourage everybody to watch the documentary. It's incredible. And
It's on BBC Select. You can find it on Amazon Prime and on Apple TV. And it's I promise you, even though the subject is American democracy and the midterms, it's actually really fun.
Yes.
I promise you, you'll have a good time for an hour.
you were amazing because you heard all sides of the spectrum, and you listened and engaged with aplomb, with laughter, with banter. And that is a good success and good mark of a reporter, that in no way did you turn anybody off. You kind of kept them flowing and kept engaging, and I think you saw the goodness in people too.
Yeah, I mean, look, the BBC's mandate is, it sounds rather quaint and old-fashioned, doesn't it? But to bring you the facts.
Right.
We will bring you the news, and then you can go away and form your opinions. It is in our charter that we are objective. I don't have a dog in the fight in these elections. I am not an American citizen. I'm a green card holder. I am here legally, don't worry. But I don't take a position. And I think that gives us the ability to hear from all sides and to present all sides so that audiences can go away and form their opinions. And we live in a world, we've spoken about this, Barry, of incredible misinformation. It is one of the other things that alarmed me as I traveled around the country, was the degree of misinformation and disinformation.
Yes, right.
People are not getting the facts. They are lost down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. And we need the best, I think, medicine against that. And perhaps one of the best ways that we can shore up democracy is to give people impartial news. It's actually hard to do, but it is the best way to counter misinformation.
It's really so critical. And I saw in your interviews you would have people that were so staunch in their opinions, left and right, and they were not correct, at least in my understanding of the facts.
No, and we correct the facts when they are wrong.
Right.
But it is. Look, I do believe democracy is in peril in this country. We've had a 250-year experiment in American democracy. There is no guarantee that the experiment carries on in a productive, positive direction. The onus is on us as providers of news to give people the tools they need to make informed judgments. Mm-hmm. And it's on all of us as consumers of news to know what we are consuming, to know whether we are looking at a views site or a news site. And the BBC is a news site, but that is a fundamental building block of democracy.
So look, that's one of the keys. So understand news, try to get the correct news out there. And then how do you get people to consume it? You know, because it's so easy on Facebook or an echo chamber for people to say, oh, you know, my buddies are, you know, looking at this news, I'm going to that site, or I'm going to do this. How do you get people to kind of shift their echo chamber habits to open themselves up to, say, good reportage from something like the Beeb?
It's a great question. I mean, look, it's a bit like a diet, right? You have to have a variety on your plate.
Yes.
And I think the same about news. I think it's fine to look at opinion sites. I honestly do. I look at them. But you need a mixed diet in your news. So if you are finding yourself always listening to MSNBC or CNN or other liberal websites or Pod Save America, or you are finding yourself always listening to Fox or, you know, Eric Erickson, vary your diet. It's what your doctor would tell you to do with your food. Do it with your news as well. And I think for us at the BBC, that means making our news not just factual and kind of earnest and boring and too much spinach, but giving you some ice cream too, making that spinach appetizing. And this is what we are. We are investing in our digital output. We are 20% of our audience in the US is Gen Z now, because we are changing the way that we present our news. We are I'm riding on horseback with cattle wranglers and cleaning trucks in Philadelphia. It's telling the story, but it's doing it in a way that is accessible and fun and reliable.
Right. And so the BBC is available on streaming, as you said, on a few different sources, also on the web.
BBC.com, of course.
Right. And future vision of BBC, where does it want to go?
So we're expanding in the US. I mean, I do think there is a real role, and there's a growing role in our audience research. We're the most trusted brand in news around the world. There is and here in the US, there is a demand in this environment in particular, when American news is so polarized. There is a market for news that is objective and fact-based. And we are that supplier of news. But the other thing I think that the BBC does that others don't in the US is we're global. I have lived and reported from Africa, Japan, Europe, here in the US. I grew up in the Middle East. I see my role as connecting the dots between what happens in Tehran or Beijing or Saudi Arabia and connecting the dots for American audiences. So we bring a global perspective, but we also bring a little bit of an outsider look to American news too. So I come to American politics, my road trip was a little bit of an outsider, insider look.
Kind of nice, a little bit of impartiality. It's like, tell me, I don't have an opinion, so tell me.
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm not the person that has the dog in this fight, so I will tell you what I see.
And you've had some amazing experience. You've lived in Paris for 4 years. You've been in, like you said, in Tehran, in Lebanon, and other places. Where's Maroon? My buddy Maroon here. You guys had a chat about Beirut, and what was the place?
Shemlan.
Shemlan.
Which is a little village where my parents learned Arabic when I was all of 2.
Do you speak Arabic?
I did. When I was growing up there, I spoke Arabic enough to go to school. And when I was living in Japan, I spoke enough Japanese to kind of get around.
No kidding. Good for you. And now you speak Anglais et Français.
Now I speak a mishmash of transatlantic British and American, I
love
think.
that. You know, there's a legend in our industry, the CEO of Group M, a guy named Erwin Gottlieb. He spoke German, Japanese, English, Chinese, and Hebrew. And I think also Yiddish he had to that. And he was a CEO. He actually controlled 1/3 of the world's total media buying. And he was brilliant. He grew up in Japan and China and then moved around. And he did the same thing.
You know, if you have lived abroad, as I have, or as the BBC has correspondents all over the world, you bring a perspective, a global perspective, to almost any story that you cover. I was just talking with my team this morning. One idea that we have that I think is a great idea that I would like to do is look at ways that other countries have solved things that America is still looking to solve. So how have other countries tackled climate change, gun control, healthcare? How have they tackled things like holidays? You guys need to take a holiday, by the way, because there are other countries around the world where people are taking 5 or 6 weeks holiday a year and being productive. How have they right? Your organizations are not going to fall apart because you take a week or 2 of holiday. So I just think that you could have fun with that, but you could also provide solutions. There are countries that have looked at the same problems, what have they done? What can America learn from those countries?
Look at Scandinavia and healthcare, things like that. We've got a lot of Finnish
Japan and healthcare.
Japan too, right.
Australia and gun control.
Right.
So other countries have faced the same sorts of challenges. What have they done, and what would that mean in an American context?
It's a great point. I think some of the challenge, and I've worked in different countries as well, and part of what I liked working in different countries is that you were able to leapfrog not only technology but infrastructure.
Right.
And part of the challenge in the U.S. is there's just so much infrastructure. There's so many people. It's an ocean liner to turn around, and sometimes in these smaller countries they can kind of zig on a motorboat. But I think we have to, you're right, take those lessons. We're going to take a couple of questions if anybody's got some thoughts for Katty K. So let me know.
I promise you I'm not scary. I have 4 kids, but I'm not very strict, so ask away.
Great. What do you have?
I have 2 boys and 2 girls.
Ah, how wonderful.
Yeah.
Perspective, just some thoughts. Okay, thank you, Ajay. Ajay, our producer. Oh, we got
yes,
yes,
we're going to play the video.
So before we get to the video, I've just got a question.
Bad writing.
The couple of thoughts. There's a lot going on in the world. Saturday Night Live did a skit where they talked about just the past 48 hours of news and how upset people were going to get when they heard it, and it was very funny but sad at the same time. Thoughts on Ukraine, Russia?
Look, I think this is going to go on for a while. The challenges are twofold: keeping the Western coalition together. When there is going to be increasing pressure on governments as gas prices rise across Europe and the winter hits in and people have to heat their homes and the cost of heating homes rises.
And OPEC is now
and OPEC is
forming with
reducing
Russians.
production, and
Right.
so that's going to boost, and let's see what that does to the midterms. But so keeping that Western coalition together and trying to find some off-ramp. One senior European diplomat that I spoke to said, we've never seen what it looks like for a nuclear power to lose. And I thought that was a very good point. How does Putin get out
What's
of
the
this?
exit ramp?
And
Yeah.
what's the exit ramp
Wow.
eventually?
Big challenge. Iran, you know, people have always looked at Iran. The people of Iran always seem to like the U.S. and the government evidently doesn't. Evidently, people are rising in the streets. Will that succeed or will it get put down? What do you think?
I think it's amazing that it hasn't been put down.
It's gone
yet,
far,
right?
farther
so
than
we've
before.
now had 4 weeks almost of young people in Iran. And by the way, it's not just young women and young girls. I mean, even you've got teenage girls, but young men are joining them too. Old people are telling the BBC that we think it is time for change. We need more flexibility. We need more rights for young women. They need to be able to dress the way they want to dress. There is a real yearning for change in the country. Can they, in the face of, I mean, they are so brave, those people. I'm always struck by how brave people are when they
right.
demonstrate in regimes that are brutal,
Sure.
where people don't have rights. It's, you know, puts it all in perspective for us, doesn't it? Let's hope that they get what they are sacrificing so much for.
I hope so. Katty, it's a great perspective. Francois has a question.
Kitty, those of us who are not Americans are large fans of the United States. And there's a saying that as goes the United States, so goes the free world. Would you be so kind as to share with us, after all your research, what gives you hope as you look ahead?
I think that's easy, Francois. It's the next generation. I look at the way that the next generation, particularly, you know, people in their 20s, are engaged in the big issues of the world, the way they are taking on climate change universally, and I don't just mean that in the United States, and the way they are connected with each other around causes. I do think we have a generation of young people who are not in this for their own promotions
Right.
or their own money or their 401ks or their stock portfolio performance, but they are really committed to issue. I do a lot of work with women and girls, and I've written books on confidence and girls around the world. There are some young women out there who are doing formidable things around the world, teenage girls who are really taking on challenges. And whenever I speak to students or people in their 20s, I'm always impressed by their commitment to a better, safer, healthier planet.
That's wonderful. We're going to run the video in a sec. Jen Willie, quick question, or does she answer it? Ajay, maybe quick from Miss Jen Willie, who leads our We Do, our Women Empowerment Program, Katty.
And I've been so inspired by you and the work that you've done around confidence and
Thank you.
girls. And so on the International Day of the Girl, speaking to an industry that tends to not necessarily be equal just yet, what advice would you have for the leaders in the room of how to help support the advancement of women in their organizations and create a more gender equitable industry?
Great.
Look, there are girls in this country do better than boys in school. We get more degrees, we get more postgraduate degrees, we even get more PhDs in the United States. There is a ton of talent resource there in young women and girls. I'm not sure that we always have the systems that support them as we could do, but recognize the talent, recognize the value. There are more than half a dozen global studies that show that companies that employ more women at senior levels outperform their competitors by every measure of profitability. I would think that is something that all of you would want. So diverse leadership makes for better business outcomes. Make sure that you are doing everything you can in your organizations to support the advantage. Encourage your young female associate to take risks. That's sometimes something that younger women find hard, but find the systems to do that and encourage that.
That's great. We've got young Amanda Fry there who takes risks kind of often. And my daughter is at MTV over there. She does social media. Katty, this has been great. Let's see the video of your great documentary coming up. Can we run that? Great.
Hey, come on, little fellas.
My first cattle wrangling.
Can I just have my lipstick real quick?
Do you think he will run again?
President Donald Trump will come back with a vengeance.
Is there any chance a Democratic candidate for president can win Arizona in 2024?
No.
Are you afraid of a civil war?
I don't want to see it. I know what war is. But if it comes, we'll fight.
Absolutely. And if we have to do that in order to save our country, we will.
The Republicans have absolutely no credible, justifiable, empirical evidence that would suggest that the last voting system was flawed.
People just have lost their trust, and that's what breaks my heart.
It didn't used to be that way.
No, I can't imagine what November's going to be like.
Post on social media, Trump with the question mark, fascinating. Katty came to us from the morning show today, BBC documentary, and now to the stage of DPAA. Katty, thank you so much.
Barry, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.